strangers. Welcome or welcome back to another Every Tuesday, original, never posted anywhere else, true scary story. And this one is story number 29. In the military, there's a saying. Well, there's a lot of sayings, usually delivered at top volume into your face, or slyly in the ranks from your buddy. But the saying pertinent to my story is someone crapped their pants, so now we all gotta wear diapers. Also known as group punishment. Look, I get it. Someone thinks it is a super neato idea to commandeer a car from the motor pool and go clubbing. They do it, and they get caught. Now, not only does top brass have to get it across to old dummy that Grand Theft Auto is bad, but they also want to reinforce the obvious to anyone else who might decide today's the day for a joyride. Hence, the whole squadron, outside at the butt crack of dawn, lined up and at attention in dress uniform. And I was stationed in the Panhandle. Summers were so muggy your lungs ached from having to drink the air instead of breathe it, while winters were so bone-chilling you'd take your socks off at the end of the day and your nail beds were blue and fish-like. So just standing there sucked. But there we'd stand, in our dress uniforms, stifling yawns and itching to hear everything about how Airman A-hole got drunk and thought luring a wild animal back to his dorm to keep as a pet would end well. It did not. Perhaps the most devious outcome of he goofed and thus ya all goofed was that now an entire squadron was against the guy. They had to pay for his crimes right alongside him without so much as a bit of the fun he'd had doing the deed. Looking back on it all, I can see the modern-day shunning for what it was. Top brass wanted us to be as pissed at the wrongdoer as they were. Our cold shoulder an additional punishment he would have to carry, at least until the next mistake was made, and we refocused our hate. But see, that's all in the military. In the military, you're a cohesive unit, cheek and jowl with the guys every day. That's the only place a scarlet letter punishment makes sense. One of my newer troops, a solid girl named Olive, had shared her first encounter with a group punishment out in the civilian world where it bred animosity, but made absolutely no sense to do so. That resulted in a lot of people being very, very on edge. See, Olive worked at a car rental place. She mostly did front counter reservations, but occasionally she'd be back in the service bay. The service bay was for washing and vacuuming cars to get them ready for the next jet-lagged businesswoman or dad looking to take his sons to the national park. All was well until late 2013. Per Olive, it wasn't her shop, but it was her county, where someone at another branch took in a return that had a bit more off about it than the usual fingerprints on the glass and crushed crackers in the footwells. For one, the floor mats were missing entirely. For another, the lady returning it reported she'd spilled a drink on the upholstery. Well, it was dark enough to show a bit, but she was so matter-of-fact that the poor sap who took the return didn't question it. He just sent it for steam cleaning. The case happened long enough ago that many people may not immediately recognize the crime this car was used in. But suffice it to say, the stain wasn't fruit juice. The floor mats were removed for a reason, and the rental agency ended up having to testify in court as the DNA evidence had been destroyed by their cleaning before it could be tested by law enforcement. An honest mistake, but the agency was pissed, and every branch got a training about it. Given the severity of the crime, and resentful of getting sternly taken to task over someone else's mistake, everyone at Olive's branch was on edge. As she explained it, it didn't help that most folks dropping off returns were usually tired, worn out from their trips or whatever, and had already made the job unpleasant by wanting to fight us about dings, stains, and obvious damage they'd inflicted on our cars. So now we had another check to make, something else for them to be defensive about. And for my branch, it all came to a head in the summer of 2014. I hadn't even clocked in, but returns were coming fast. I wanted to relieve the guy on counter, Tim. I took a clipboard and walked back to check on a couple of returns. Car number 3, a silver midsize sedan, had no scratches or damage on the outside. Good deal. I opened the car door up, and something caught my eye on the side of the seat where the driver would reach down to adjust it. There was a dark smear. Not big, and if you'd only looked in without opening the door, you'd miss it. I leaned down and looked. I was able to make out a couple of finger shapes. I made a little note on the clipboard, but with the crime of last year, I was tense. There isn't a lot of stuff that dries red-brown. I looked at the clipboard and made my way to the back seat. Jammed up under the driver's side was what looked like a rag, and on the edge of it, I saw more dark stains. Okay, a bit of blood from cutting your hand would explain the marks on the seat handle, but this rag appeared to have a great deal more of the dark stains on it. I felt my stomach tense, and the potential of what this could be really sunk in. Normally, we'd need to collect any left-behind litter or clutter, but remembering the butt-reaming the company had gotten over taking back Miss Arya's car and destroying a crime scene, I left the rag exactly where it was. Plus, the thing looked sticky. Blood or not, I wasn't wearing gloves. The branch was notoriously frugal and often forgot to stock things they deemed as non-essential. Even if it was innocent, I just didn't want to touch it. Slowly, I made my way to the trunk and popped it open. A breath I hadn't been aware I was holding came out in a whoosh. The trunk carpet was as clean as a whistle. But as I breathed in a new gulp of air, the taste of bleach cleaner hit me, clenched my stomach like a fist. Uh-oh. Big uh-oh. Who cleans a rental car? I reached out with the edge of the clipboard to lift the carpet liner, exposing the metal depression underneath where we keep the spare. The bottom of the carpet liner was stained, a big, ugly brown stain, and clinging to one edge of the hole where a spare tire could be tucked was a tiny bit of what looked like raw meat. Panicked, I dropped clipboard and carpet and stood, stunned. The lurid details of that winter's court case played in my head. Oh crap, big crap. I turned and I booked it back to the receptionist lobby, and of course the lobby was empty. The person who dropped off the car had already gone. Tim looked up, the dazed slap of the customer service experience reading fresh lines on his young face. He started to tell me about some woman who'd nearly taken his head off, about not giving her a PT Cruiser she'd seen in our lot. She'd booked an economy car, and the weird little butler car was already spoken for. But I cut him off and asked him about the silver sedan. He admitted what I'd guessed. Tim was so slammed, he hadn't opened all the doors or done more than glance at the trunk. It was standing open out in the air, dissipating the noxious bleach fumes to where he hadn't noticed them. I asked Tim if he remembered the guy who'd turned it in. He could only remember 2 male customers. One, a gangly teen, last name on his paperwork Walters, who'd been issued a rental by his insurance company while his was in the shop. The second was a very large, quiet man wearing a pair of combat boots. His paperwork gave his last name as Forrester. Tim remembered the boots because he remembered thinking it was strange in a town where most people wore flip-flops and casual shoes in our warm summers. This gave my stomach another lurch. I was already dreading my intuition of which person would have returned a car that, from the face of it, looked like another crime scene. Tim looked stunned, but the training we'd had kicked in. I told him to ring the cops on the non-emergency number we'd been given and have them send someone over to take a look. I then doubled back to the bay to retrieve the clipboard. Good thing I did, too. The crew back there was already sidling up to it, ready to start cleaning it for the next ride. I warned them off, and when Carl, an old-timer of at least 10 years with the company, saw the fingerprints on the side of the seat, he turned pale and crossed himself, backing away. As we stood, speaking in hushed voices about what this could be, the bay phone on the wall rang. I picked it up, clearing the nerves from my voice, and I gave the standard, "Thank you for calling X Car Rental. This is Penny. How may I help you today?" The voice that greeted me was rough, low, quiet. If we hadn't been in shocked silence from the grisly discovery, I doubt I could have made out what he was saying. He said, "Ma'am, I do believe you have something that belongs to me." My face must have broadcast the sudden drop in my insides. Carl looked deeply concerned, mouthing "what" at me. But I held up a hand to tell him to wait. I asked the voice on the line, "What? I'm sorry, sir, could you repeat that?" Instead, he said, he believed he left his phone in a car he'd just returned to us. A silver car. A sedan. Oh boy. Well, at least it confirmed the gangly teen was off the hook. Sometimes I hate being right. But now what? What else could I do? I lied. I told him I had just begun inspecting the car, but I hadn't recovered a phone, and if I found it, and he gave me his number, I could call him back. But as I spoke, in the bay, the song "Sugar, Sugar" by the Archies rang out. It echoed in the silence as impudently as a fart in church. That rough chuckle came crawling down the phone line again. He told me, "I'll be by in 10 to pick it up." Click. The line was dead. Big crap. Huge. Literal murderer coming by to pick up his phone, which he'd clearly called on a different line to see if he could hear it over our landline. Clever. Just the trait you don't want in a homicidal maniac. I quickly relayed to Carl what had happened. For the first time in my knowing him, Carl looked confused, unsure of what to do. He took a step, wanting to retrieve the phone. I nearly shouted at him not to touch it, that the cops were on their way, and like hell was our shop going to be responsible for another round of scoldings for messing up a crime scene. I rushed back to the lobby, still empty of customers, good, and police, bad. Tim was standing rigid, and when he sighted me, he rushed to tell me that he'd called the police. The dispatcher had given him a time of 10 to 15 minutes for a nearby unit to arrive. I quickly filled him in on our surprise visitor, who was also en route, and Tim's already pale face went so white it was almost gray. We didn't have any stools or chairs behind the counter. Corporate policy. They didn't pay us to sit like they did the managers. So I had him sit down on the floor behind the counter to catch his breath. I took up my post behind the counter and waited to see who would arrive first. A stroke of good luck, finally. It was the cops. Tim sprang from behind the counter. I figured having him talk to the 2 impassive police officers would help put him at ease. I told him to go greet them, handed him the clipboard. He tweezed it between 2 fingers like it was itself evidence of a crime, and trotted over to speak with the cops. But as he did, gesturing to the notes I'd made on the clipboard, I saw a Dodge Charger roll into our lot. What emerged was a large man, at least 6 feet tall and near as wide, And what's worse, the cops hadn't appeared to notice him. But as the large man entered the lobby, boots clopping onto the tile, he noticed them. To my horror, he grinned. His thick neck came down almost like how a cartoon character postures to sneak up behind someone. Oh God, I realized. That's what he was doing. I didn't know what to do. He was huge. He had returned a car that looked like a murder scene. He was creeping up silently behind two cops, moving those heavy boots slickly to silence their steps. I had to do something. And at that moment, as decided by my instincts, I decided what I needed to do was circle behind the large man myself. And taking in as much air as I could, I yelled, "Look out!" as I lunged for the man's legs. What happened next was a blur. I hit him low, feeling his knees buckle as he began to fall. I saw the cops turn, one of them looking oddly familiar, seeing his hand instinctively clear leather, his gun coming half out of the holster as his face registered shock. I could see Tim's eyes roll up, and he crumpled to the floor, the other cop turning to look at him as Tim fainted dead away. I felt the man beneath me groan, try to roll, but I clung as hard as I could. The first cop had closed the distance as I felt his hand, thankfully empty of the gun, tap my shoulder. And he said, "Ma'am, you can get off my brother. It's okay." I looked up at the cop's chest. Sure enough, Officer Forrester stood over me. Same name as the man underneath me on his paperwork. I slowly released the Mr. Forrester I had tackled, who turned out to be Tech Sergeant Forrester, a recruiter from the Air Force. I guess we should have guessed that from the Dodge Charger. And the red stains and raw meat were remnants from an overturned crock pot of chili that he'd been taking to work. After the usual ribbing, "Nice going, Olive, real Billy Badass over here," she continued. She told us that anyway, Tech Sergeant Forrester wasn't mad about the tackle. In fact, he said he was impressed by her taking action, and ended up giving her a card to come in and talk to him about putting her skills to better use or something. And 4 months later, there she was, getting screamed at by a TI. I told Olive that I was glad there were no hard feelings from Forrester. She looked at me, completely deadpan, and gestured to the armory in which we sat. That gesture said it all. If none of you have ever pulled armory duty, you may not understand that it's not exactly an action-packed thrill ride. Thanks so much for listening. Like, comment, subscribe as you see fit. And until next time, stay strange, but stay safe. And don't return suspiciously stained rental cars. Just a pro gamer move from me to you. Take care, strangers.